President Trump placed a call to the New York Times yesterday afternoon to refute some recent coverage of his administration from a rival paper. After 2 aides were indicted and a former policy advisor pled guilty, the president also wanted to assert, quote, "I'm not under investigation, as you know." But that is not what his chief of staff, John Kelly, said on Monday.
We're in great hopes that it wraps up. It is very distracting to the president, as it would be to any citizen, to be investigated for something.
Trump also said of the indictment of his former campaign chief, Paul Manafort, quote, "And even if you look at that, there's not even a mention of Trump in there. It has nothing to do with us."
Oh, my God.
The president has a bone to pick with the Washington Post for a story about his reaction to the charges on Monday entitled "Upstairs at Home, with the TV on, Trump fumes over Russia indictments." Specifically, the reporting that Trump's anger Monday was visible to those who interacted with him. The president told the Times, I'm actually not angry at anybody." Meanwhile, new reporting in Vanity Fair says the president is upset with the advice he received from son-in-law and unpaid advisor Jared Kushner, who reportedly he calls bad blood. Speaking to Steve Bannon on Tuesday, a source briefed on the call said Trump blamed Kushner for his role in decisions, specifically the firings of Mike Flynn and James Comey, that led to Bob Mueller's appointment. And when Roger Stone recently told Trump that Kushner was giving him bad political advice, Trump agreed, according to a source familiar with the conversation. Although I smell another dirty layer to this, which would be Steve Bannon trying to push out Jared Kushner.
Except
Who knows?
You also
but it's
had
just a mess.
Sam Nunberg in the Vanity Fair piece, Heidi, saying that Jared was the worst political advisor in modern American history. And we've had reports from several sources and other journalists that Donald Trump has been trying just daily to push Jared and Ivanka out of the White House and get them back to New York.
Save them.
Daily.
Which I do think aligns with the news reports that he's back in regular contact with Bannon. Because if you remember when that Trump Tower meeting was reported, we never got to the bottom of how that was leaked out. And the fact that, Kushner had played a role in setting it up as well. So Bannon was suspected to have been behind that, and Bannon is suspected to be behind what's going on now with this offensive against Kushner.
It's so comical, though, now to hear people say Jared Kushner's a terrible political advisor. You know why? Because he ran a newspaper and made buildings in New York City. He's not a political advisor. And by the way, that's not even a knock on him. I'm sure he was fine at running the newspaper. I don't know.
We've all been saying that.
Yeah.
Everybody's been saying that.
It's like how when Scaramucci came in to be the communications.
Oh my God!
It's like, what do you expect these people to do? They have no background at all in politics. They're not going to work magic into.
I mean, it's like
what are these? The foreign policy team. Some of the lower levels, you're like, what's going on?
These aren't lower. George Papadopoulos. We just did a piece on George Papadopoulos.
What
came from nowhere. I talked to his professor at DePaul, who said he was absolutely shocked when he found out that George Papadopoulos was a foreign policy advisor to the president. He said he was a terrible student.
By the way, that's what Jared Kushner, one of his professors, said at Harvard, saying he's an okay guy, but I sure wouldn't expect him to be in charge of foreign policy.
I don't think staffing is the main issue with this presidency, but it is an issue.
It's a huge issue.
And, it was weird when Donald Trump kept giving Jared like an ever large portfolio.
Middle East
peace and the opioid crisis and make the government. In the end, what would have been a wiser thing for Trump to have done is to tell Jared Kushner, go run a staffing process for me. Find really smart people.
Right.
Bring them into this government and help me out. And he just didn't do that at the beginning, and it could be the original sin.
That would have worked, except for the fact that both Jared Kushner and Donald Trump believed that the fewer people they hired, the better. They didn't trust anybody in the state. They didn't trust anybody anywhere. That's why we have a government run by very inexperienced hands. And Heidi, there was another extraordinary thing we're going to be talking to Gabe Sherman about in that piece, that Bannon has already done a quick run through the cabinet and believes that if things continue as they're going, that if there's a vote on the 25th Amendment, that Trump will be voted out.
Well, the timing on all of this is strategic, and that's what is scary, I think, for people in the White House, is that Bannon is also talking about this tax cut initiative kind of being the trigger right? That if that doesn't go through, the party kind of starts to explode and people turn on each other, people turn on the president. And it also corresponds with these charges coming out.
Who's wearing the wires in the White House?
Right.
Right? Who's wearing, when you go into a meeting, who's wearing a wire?
We don't know.
No. And
Neither
also,
does the president.
fascinating that Dina Powell and Gary Cohn, if you say Russia,
They duck out.
Really
they run out of the room, which is, by the way, smart move. If I'm either of their
I'd be out of
lawyers,
the room.
I would say if anybody even talks about, like,
You can just see them
Baltic
like turning
states,
around.
go to the, just get out. If you hear
That's
back
the
in the
weird thing about-
USSR, leave.
That's the weird thing about the Kushner timing, though. All of these things that we're talking about in terms of him just being helplessly mismatched in this role are true. But it also is true that whenever this White House faces a crisis, somebody has to be the sacrifice. Somebody has to get strung up. So how is Jared Kushner, to be fair, to blame for what's going on right now with the status of the Russia investigation?
I have a question for you. Do you think Powell and Cohn, do they get up and just leave, or do they make up an excuse before they like, oh, you know, I got to call?
I think
They started coughing.
Or they just literally
Started
like
coughing effect. But,
Yeah.
but it is a wise thing to do. But no, you're right, though. So Jared Kushner is now being nailed for one of the stupidest things the Trump administration's done, and that's the firing of James Comey. Yeah. Mika and I have seen the interactions between Donald Trump and Jared Kushner enough to know that Donald Trump does what Donald Trump wants to do.
Exactly.
If Donald Trump did not want to fire James Comey, he would not have fired James Comey. And for anybody to try to put that on Jared Kushner, even if he said, yeah, dad-in-law, sounds like a great idea, that is so disingenuous by Steve Bannon to run around. By the way, I just got to say this. I've been calling Steve Bannon Mr. 33%, you know, because he's sort of, his strategy has put Donald Trump at 33%. You got to call him Mr. 8% now. Steve Bannon, Willie, has an 8% approval rating in America. We showed the poll yesterday, 8%. So I've just got to ask, if you're taking advice from a guy that has an 8% approval rate, his approval, I think Mitch McConnell's approval rating is double Steve Bannon's. So if you were still taking advice from a guy that has an 8% approval rating in America, then you are actually playing into those suggesting that you're not fit to be president of the United States. Like the 25th Amendment's fitting kind of a little more snug this morning.
Well, he helped make him president, even though Donald Trump doesn't like to admit that. Donald Trump knows that Steve Bannon helped put him where he is today. And I think on some visceral level, he trusts him.
Troll Donald Trump right now?
About President Bannon, you mean? Yeah. No. But on some visceral level, he believes that the instincts of Steve Bannon got him where he is, and at least in part, and that he ought to follow through. And if that's only worth 8 to 33%, so be it.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.